Will my small children be bitten by snakes?
Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about the latest entry in the 2022 Jehovah's Witness Pursue Peace Convention. It's an extravaganza of weird Bible discourses given by weird old guys, and there's a lot of propaganda videos to get to, so without any further ado, let's get into the clips which we watch, and I don't have a good intro for rolling into the clips, but we'll figure that out later. So, like all these programs, this starts with a music video presentation. One thing that's kind of notable is that this Kingdom song that is playing underneath the music video has marching drums. Which kind of gives it an almost military feel, and that's not an accident. Soldiers of Jah do a thing. There's a lyric in a song that is about being a soldier of Jah. Witnesses have terms like theocratic warfare, being soldiers of Jah, and the preaching work is kind of like their battlefield, but you win the battle by converting them to your religion. And then actually there is a battle, which is the War of Armageddon, which you don't take part in, but that's confusing. We'll get to that later. And we get to see kids preaching in school. If you're not familiar, Witness kids are told that school is their own personal territory. All the adults get territory maps to go knock on doors around the neighborhood, but you, as a student, have access to all these kids in your school. This is your territory. You should be witnessing, trying to preach to people whenever you get a chance. And so it's just nice, and there's nothing weird about that. Not much to say about this music video. It is just 10 minutes of emotionally stirring propaganda, but really, the emotions are only so emotional because there's like such triumphant music under it. Most of the footage is just like people knocking on doors and preaching on a cart or working in a factory. There's not a whole lot of exciting things happening. So I kind of wondered what would happen if you played different music under it. But mostly what we're going to be talking about is a symposium. Multiple talks dedicated to one single subject. The subject here is Take Delight in God's Promises of Peace. And the first part is given by Sam Hurd, entitled My Servants Will Eat, My Servants Will Drink.
In his word, Jehovah has promised to...
Okay, Sam's intro is pretty boring. He then introduces a video, which is also kind of boring and inconsequential, but there's a few nuggets, a few spiritual gems which we shall dig for by watching the video with our eye shovels.
Through Isaiah, Jehovah promised to feed his servants physically and spiritually. Today, Jehovah invites us to a banquet that is spiritually nourishing. Bible-based videos and publications draw us close to God and satisfy our hunger for truth. In the New World,
Okay, so the thrust of this talk, and indeed the entire symposium, is in the book of Isaiah, God promised the Israelites who were in exile a lot of stuff, including not being hungry anymore, having plenty to drink, and inheriting the promised land. Yay! That's a quote from the book of Isaiah. But, you see, this is a prophecy that is actually being fulfilled now. It's being fulfilled currently, because look at all the spiritual food and how our spiritual thirst is being quenched by the stuff that we make at jw.orgindustries.com. I have a couple issues with this. A couple years ago, David Splain, another governing body member, gave a talk talking about kind of a change in direction for the organization. They used to focus on types and antitypes. Basically, it's just foreshadowing, but for what they perceive as real life. So a prophecy might have a minor fulfillment talked about in the Bible, but it would later have a larger fulfillment later in the Bible, or in our day now, or in the future with Armageddon, or after the other Armageddon, the secret bonus Armageddon that they don't tell you about when you join.
Years ago, our publications often applied certain Bible accounts and certain Bible characters as types of something greater. But you've noticed that in recent years, that is seldom done.
So David Splain says, we don't really do that anymore. But the entirety of what they're talking about is based around types and antitypes. This prophecy talked about in Isaiah was sort of half fulfilled, and we'll get to that in Isaiah's day, but also it's being bonus fulfilled now, and will be triple all the way 100% safety guaranteed fulfilled in the new world, in paradise after Armageddon. So part of my issue with all of these talks going forward is that David Splain, another governing body member, doesn't seem to think that there's any scriptural basis for thinking that there should be a larger fulfillment of anything unless the Bible specifically says so.
Now we know that these are genuine types because the Word of God says they are.
But here's the question.
Who is to decide if a person or an event is a type if the Word of God doesn't say anything about it? Who is qualified to do that? Our answer? We can do no better than to quote our beloved brother Albert Schroeder, who said, "We need to exercise great care when applying accounts in the Hebrew Scriptures as prophetic patterns or types if these accounts are not applied in the Scriptures themselves."
Wasn't that a beautiful statement? We agree with it.
And the Bible does not specifically say that any of the things they're talking about will have larger fulfillments. These things were said during Isaiah's day and were meant to apply to people of that day. The other big issue I have is the notion of spiritual food or spiritual drink, which is kind of interchangeable, but, you know, God meant both of those things, I guess. The idea of spiritual food, that there needs to be somebody providing spiritual food, is central to Jehovah's Witness doctrine. This is what everything revolves around. Jesus, according to them, prophesied that there would be a faithful and discreet slave who would dispense spiritual food at the proper time to his servants during the last days. Now, there's nothing in that illustration that Jesus gave to indicate that it would be a prophecy. I'm not going to harp on this too much. I go in depth into this in another video, which I'll link to, blah, blah, blah. However, when you look at the parable of the faithful and wise servant, as it's called by basically everybody else in the entire world, there's nothing that Jesus said that indicated that it was a prophecy. All other Bible scholars agree that this is a parable. Not Watchtower, though. They think it's a prophecy about a foretold slave class, because another issue is that there's 8 governing body members, not just one. So Jesus foretold that there would be a faithful slave, but apparently what he meant by that is that there would be some guys who would come together and form the mega slave. The other thing, of course, is that Jesus does not say spiritual food. He just says food, but Watchtower would say, well, food in the Bible often means spiritual food. So here's the thing with that.
First off, no.
Now, if you go on Watchtower Online Library and search spiritual food in quotation marks, you get 1,467 results on all the publications on Watchtower Online Library, which is not all the publications, by the way, but it's a lot of publications, and that's a lot of search results. But if you search for just Bibles, you get 9 results. Most of these are in study notes. They talk about spiritual food in the study notes. These are pseudo-scholarly scriptural insights. You know, instead of having like the Oxford Study Bible, you have Watchtower Study Bible. So in the margins, it'll tell you what this meant historically. and mostly what it means to Jehovah's Witnesses now. So they mention spiritual food a few times in their study notes for the book of Acts, Ephesians, Colossians, 1 Corinthians. But the only verse in the Bible that actually uses the phrase spiritual food is in 1 Corinthians. And if you look at the context, he's talking about, what do you know, the Israelites. The thing is, he's not talking about figurative food. He's talking about manna from heaven. He's not talking about insight that was dispensed by God that some people could call food, metaphorically, for fun.
But where the Bible is silent, we must be silent.
Spiritual food is just an aphorism that Watchtower made up. It's only in the Bible once, and it refers to literal spiritual food, manna, coming down from heaven. The rest of it is assumptions and extrapolations that Watchtower is making. So keep that in mind. This entire talk is on the basis of, oh my God, Bible prophecy is being fulfilled now. Jehovah said that his people would not go hungry. And look at all the spiritual food that we get to satisfy our information and knowledge hunger and the thirst of learning about the Bible. And this is important because it reinforces the essentialness of the faithful and discreet slave, the governing body themselves. See, if their followers don't believe that there was a prophetically foretold slave class who would dispense spiritual food at the proper time, they are kind of out of a job, and they don't have a lot of job experiences, and their healthcare is paid for by Watchtower, and all their meals are free, and they get to travel around the world, and they have power over 8 million people, and they have, like, a nice apartment to live in. You know, they don't get a lakeside complex if spiritual food isn't really a thing talked about in the Bible. And I think it's worth breaking these things down to the nitty-gritty, because evidently, to use one of Watchtower's favorite phrases, what Jesus meant when he said food at the proper time was spiritual food, like metaphorical food. And what he meant by spiritual food was like books and magazines and highly produced videos that would go on a website. Jesus, in the Bible, foretold that a group of guys would call themselves a slave, and they would make some videos on the internet, and that means that he chose them. But don't worry, Sam Hurd is going to clear this all up for us.
What a blessing it is to be among Jehovah's people. Spiritual provisions flow to us like an ever-broadening and ever-deepening river. There's not a grain of salt missing, not a slice of bread or a pat of butter.
Nothing's missing. You have everything you need. Everything we're doing is everything you need. So don't ever ask us to do more. Don't ever ask us to do anything differently, because this is what Jehovah wants you to have. You got all the salt and seasonings that you need. It's flowing like a river, all these videos that we release on our website.
There is way too much to eat at one meal. We have to come to Jehovah's table several times a week to keep our spiritual fiber intact and energy strong for the work we engage in, the kingdom preaching. We have an abundance of nourishing food, Bible-based publications, recordings and videos, meetings and conventions, website material.
Sam has taken the very simple concept of the Bible mentioning food sometimes, turned that into spiritual food, now turns this into we have to go to Jehovah's spiritual table for his buffet multiple times a week because we can't possibly eat it all in one go. We're stuffed with all of the magazines we're reading and talks we're listening to, especially by me, Sam Hurd, right now.
He doesn't make us come.
So Sam Hurd has taken a fairly simple concept that is sort of made up, spiritual food, and has implied and imbued all of these different verses and pseudo-spiritual sounding things with meaning. What we have here is the aesthetic of depth. When you hear these things as a witness, you hear all of these illustrations taking this one verse and pulling all these different insights out of them, you think, wow, he is getting so deep into this subject matter. This is really the deep things of God, another thing that witnesses like to say. But when you look closely, the pool is very shallow. It's like an optical illusion, like the primrose steps PEMDAS steps, Penrose steps, that optical illusion where you can't really tell where the staircase begins or ends. I guess it's like that. That's the only illusion I could think of at the time. It's talks like this that make the convention feel like an exciting, deep spiritual experience, but when you think about it, it all kind of falls apart and you realize that you're just looking at some steps or a shallow end of a pool. Take your pick of metaphors.
Jehovah has not deviated from his promise. Note this one, Psalm 72:16. Jehovah has placed everything we need on the table. We must willfully come to the table and sit down and eat. He doesn't make us come.
Like some mothers may have to demand a reluctant child to come to the house for playing and eat a meal.
Another condemnation of children, the most dangerous demographic within Jehovah's Witnesses. Kids. They're enemies of God. They're lazy. They're too busy playing to enjoy God's spiritual hometown buffet. I do think it's worth noting, though, that these talks are incredibly infantilizing. They talk slowly with small words in a tone that a preschool teacher might take to calm down a group of kids. But while they're talking in these infantilizing tones and using infantilizing language, they're also talking about how terrible kids are, and I don't know that that's necessarily an accident. Groups like this want you to go to the place where you get harmed to also get healed. So the place where you go to feel good should also make you feel bad. This is a truism of high control groups that you find throughout different books written by cult experts and psychologists and stuff. Our next talk is given by Ron Curzon, the Stepford husband among Stepford husbands.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. This familiar saying might be true with human promises, but is certainly not true with promises from Jehovah.
If there was ever any question as to whether or not these guys really do believe the stuff that they preach, yeah, somebody desperately trying to steer people's vision away from the obvious contradictions in their doctrine probably wouldn't say something like this. This is accidentally enlightening. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. But not with us, though. We're different. And when I say we, I don't even mean me. I mean the big man. Big Papa in the sky. Combined with how cringy and overtly cult-like a lot of this convention is, I wouldn't be surprised if some people went home and had an honest think about whether or not this particular religion? That's how I'm shortening religion from now on, is just religion.
These promises must have strengthened the Jews.
Now, Jehovah didn't say that they might build and live in their own homes and they might enjoy the fruitage from their own vineyards. No, he told his precious chosen ones that they will enjoy these promises to the full.
Okay. If you're a witness or a former witness watching this, you have heard this exact line of reasoning about a billion times in your life. It's something that every lazy speaker does, and I include myself in these ranks of lazy speakers who are desperate to make some kind of point about something. Anytime you see any kind of declarative language made by God, you say, oh, well, see, Jehovah didn't say that he might do something. He said that he will do something. And that means that it's even more better than the thing that you thought before. Also, just a little reminder, there's nothing in any of these verses insinuating that this applied to anyone else other than the Jews. In fact, he mentions that this would have strengthened the Jews at the time, because it was made for them at the time. And there's nothing in writing saying that it would apply to anyone else at any other time. So, will they stop it, please? No, that's actually the whole point of the symposium, and I should probably stop banging on this point, because I don't want to be the JW of XJWs.
No, they hadn't been told every detail, and there were many unknowns regarding their future. They knew their God Jehovah. They knew that his promises were for their good, and that they would all come true.
Aha, you see, the Israelites didn't know every little detail, but they knew Jehovah. So they didn't annoy him all the time with all these questions. So shut up. This is obviously a pithy point to apply to modern day witnesses, but it also just isn't true like, famously, one of the main things the Israelites did was question God all the time. Like, they keep quoting the Psalms, and in the Psalms, the psalmist is often being like, hey, God, why are you not stopping all the bad stuff? There's a lot of wars and people are trying to kill me. Shouldn't you do something about that? In the wilderness, after Moses, the Israelites were constantly complaining and talking about how God should do something. So this notion that they didn't have all the details, but they knew their God, so they just trusted in him, is actually not true. They asked a lot of questions, and what was nice about Bible times, if you take it at face value as literal history, is God would answer a lot. He would just give answers. And some prophet would be like, here's what Jehovah said. The governing body and their helpers don't even do that. They're just like, trust us. The Bible said this. It probably applies to us. So, leave us alone. We got this all figured out.
Knowing that God fulfilled all of his promises in the past, knowing that God fulfilled all of his promises in the past,
knowing that God fulfilled all of his promises in the past.
Hang on a second. So, let's just put a pin in this. Signpost this. Ron is saying that Jehovah fulfilled all of his promises to the Jewish people, right? He's saying that it all came true. Everything Jehovah promised to them at that time came true for them at the time, right? It's very declarative, and it might come up later, so just keep the pin in the pin cushion that you have at the ready at all times, because we're gonna pull out that pin later, and I'm gonna stab myself with it.
strengthens our trust and confidence that all of his promises for the future, like the ones that we read in Isaiah 65, will all come true for our everlasting good.
What a joy.
It will be to build and then live in our own home, never having to worry that we will lose it because of a natural disaster or economic collapse. Sadly, though, many of our brothers and sisters today do suffer the harsh realities of living in this old system of things. For example, a sister in Poland named Gabriela experienced great loss when her home was nearly destroyed by a flood. How did she maintain her joy? Notice what she said.
I don't want to talk about what I lost. Those are just material things. Rather, I want to tell you how much I gained. This experience reassured me that being a part of the Christian congregation is a unique privilege as well as a source of joy and happiness. So, although she went through some very difficult times, what did she gain? Joy and happiness.
So, she doesn't want to talk about how much she lost, but what about people that lose, I don't know, family members, their loved ones, friends, children in natural disasters? They might want to talk about that, and they might not be as happy about the things that they have supposedly gained, but, you know, Watchtower is also one to remind folks that sometimes natural disasters result in miracles for the organization and are good.
Well, after visiting all the villages, no one was willing to sell any of their sand that we needed until we reached the last village, which was willing to sell the sand. But the problem was there was a dispute between two chiefs that bordered that beach. And one chief said, no, that's my sand. The other one said it was his sand. Well, they couldn't come to an agreement, so they weren't willing to sell it. So we were at the stage where we were getting ready to need it in a few days so we can move forward with the extension of the Kingdom Hall. At that point, things got worse because there was a typhoon approaching the island. So we just had the construction crew stop work. So the next morning, we were able to get in contact with the construction overseer on the island. And he said, I've got really good news. There was no damage. The storm took a turn just before it hit the island and just grazed it. He says, I have some other good news. And I just got a call from the village chiefs. Apparently, the storm surge had washed up a bunch of sand over their road to their villages, and they had no way of removing it. So they said, we have plenty of sand. Can you come and help us get rid of it?
Jehovah's blessing is the most important thing that we can have on our projects, from the start to the finish.
So, you know, if you're subjected to a natural disaster that destroys your life, it might have given free sands to the Legional Building Committee. So, you never know.
So, although she went through some very difficult times, what did she gain? Joy and happiness. Now, what about a single sister from Puerto Rico named Anel? She endured a very difficult test back in 2017 when Hurricane Maria destroyed her home. As a result of that storm, she lost her job.
Remember, Jehovah will not stop the natural disaster from happening or save you from the natural disaster, but he will make you feel a little bit less sad that it happened. So, he's a pretty good guy when you think about it.
What about you? Are you suffering some sort of storm in your life? Perhaps from a natural disaster, or maybe a figurative one caused by a health issue, a family problem, or some injustice. During such times, it's normal to experience feelings of anxiety, worry about our future, the safety of our family, but don't allow such feelings to paralyze you.
It's normal, but cut it out. Stop it, because it might make you stop going to meetings, and if you stop going to meetings, then you might start to think for yourself or drift away, and either way, we're not getting any money, so that's no good for anybody.
Like Gabriella and Anel, keep doing what you can and continue trusting in Jehovah.
I don't want to be too pedantic. Lie, not true. I do. It's the only reason why this channel exists is so that I can nitpick my old bosses. That advice of just do what you can is something that I definitely would have found super encouraging as a witness. Whenever a brother would emphasize that, I felt like, yes, that is so loving and reasonable. But you also have talks given by the likes of Samuel Hurd about, are you doing everything you can do? And the conclusion he draws is, well, probably not. You should probably do a little bit more.
Is my best good enough? We might see others in the congregation that are doing more than we are. But then we look back at Galatians 6:4 again, and it clearly said that I should not compare myself with the other person. So we could quickly assume that we're doing what we can, reasoning that it's good enough. But let's not forget the first part of the verse. We are to examine our own actions. We need to compare what we are doing with what we personally could be doing. We need to be active and not become self-satisfied and overconfident.
And with most talks, the undercurrent of the whole thing is, are you doing everything you can? Well, maybe you are. But could you examine your circumstances and see if you're perhaps spending too much time on leisure activities? If you are reading things that are not the Bible or the various publications that we publicate? Now, the implication is do everything you can. But everything you can do is probably more than you think. So do everything that we think you can do, not necessarily everything that you think you can do, because your mind and your heart isn't perfect and selfish, and you can't trust them, so rely on Jehovah, aka us, and the stuff that we're telling you.
Also, continue to trust in our loving brotherhood. Our brothers and sisters are true friends who are ready to show love in our time of distress. They will quickly come to our aid by providing practical assistance and relief provisions. They will help us rebuild our home, rebuild our life. They will build us up, stabilize us with words of encouragement. When we put our complete trust in Jehovah and His promises, we receive the best protection possible.
He didn't just say they might do that, he said they would do that. Ooh. So this unequivocal trust in your brothers and sisters, they are true friends, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, is actually kind of dangerous, because one of the issues culturally within Jehovah's Witnesses is that they trust the group more than anybody else. And this leads to the issues with CSA that Watchtower has a lot of. A big reason why this happens is because of the complete trust that young ones are told to have in their brothers and sisters in the congregation, and that parents have in all their brothers and sisters. So it's nothing for a parent to decide to let their kid work alone with brother so-and-so out in service, because these are our Christian brothers. They would never do a crime, except when they do. So we have to watch our association within the congregation. You know, sometimes Watchtower likes to make these little stipulations, but sometimes, more often, they don't. And they just talk about how absolutely incredible the organization is. Your brothers and sisters are part of that organization. Why wouldn't you trust them? It's stuff like this that leads to an inherent absolute trust in the system, and an absolute mistrust in any kind of outside authority, and that's how Watchtower, and more importantly, its abused members, wind up in hot water.
As we continue our consideration of the promises of peace in Isaiah's prophecies, I'd like you to imagine an Israelite living in Babylon. Now, he's just learned that Jews can return to Jerusalem and help to rebuild the temple. So he must decide if he and his family will leave Babylon to make the long trip to his homeland. What might he consider? Well, after 70 years, the land must have changed. Fields would be overgrown with weeds. Wolves, leopards, lions, and bears must freely walk in the fields. Snakes make their home there. So he might ask himself, will my domestic animals be killed by predators?
Will my small children be bitten by snakes?
And what about the danger of fierce men attacking us on the journey home? Well, any such fears could be dispelled by considering the prophecy at Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. The wolf will reside for a while with the lamb, and with the young goat, the leopard will lie down. And the calf and the lion and the fattened animal will all be together. And a little boy will lead them. The cow and the bear will feed together, and their young will lie down together. The lion will eat straw like the bull. The nursing child will play over the lair of a cobra. And a weaned child would put his hand over the den of a poisonous snake. They will not cause any harm or any ruin in all my holy mountain, because the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah as the waters cover the sea. What a beautiful promise of peace. Jews wouldn't need to fear wild animals or fierce men on their journey home or in their restored land.
Interesting. This is new to me. It might not be new light, but it's new to me light, which is that this promise of the animals being peaceful and being able to play over a cobra hole apparently was fulfilled in Bible times, because no wild animals attacked the Jews on the way to the place they were going. But hang on a second. Jehovah didn't say the lion might not eat straw metaphorically. It said that he would not eat straw, he being the one lion that I've personified in my brain. We were always taught, as witnesses, by my recollection, that this all applied to the paradise, because obviously humans didn't have peaceful interactions with animals. In fact, God sent some animals after some kids one time. That wasn't necessarily cool. But apparently this part of the promise that God made the Israelites was symbolic. So some parts were literal, and some parts were symbolic. Now, Jehovah did not in any way make it clear which parts were literal and which parts were symbolic in the initial prophecy, but the guy, and I don't remember his name, and I never will, I refuse to, so he's just the guy, he mentions that this is poetic language.
These poetic words, Jehovah assured the exiles that they and their livestock would be safe. He would bless them with peace.
See, I think what happened is that Watchtower wanted to do this symposium about how everything that Jehovah promised back in the day came true for the Jews in their exile, so obviously they'll come true in the future.
God fulfilled all of his promises in the past.
What they realized when researching it is a lot of the stuff that Jehovah said didn't actually come true. Like, lions did not start eating straw, and they did not have peace with all the wild animals. So what's the deal with that?
And did you notice, according to verse 7, the lion would symbolically eat straw, illustrating that lions wouldn't kill the Jews' cattle.
And so what you're seeing, and are going to continue to see, is reappropriating some of these promises which would seem to an uneducated person, a layman perhaps, cracking open their Bible like an idiot.
Say crack again.
Crack.
Thinking they can understand something without this guy and his buddies. They might think that some of the promises in the Bible didn't come true. But what Watchtower's saying is, no, this did come true symbolically in the past, and it's also happening symbolically and kind of figuratively sometimes now, and fully in the future. So that's interesting and new for me. A challenge for any Jehovah's Witness watching this. Is there a single instance in the Bible of anybody saying, this will be spiritually fulfilled? The entire notion of a spiritual fulfillment and then a physical fulfillment. Is this language found anywhere in the Bible? I don't think so. I think, guys, we're all among friends here, right? I think this is just something that he's making up in here. Let's see what Bo thinks, because Bo's here hanging out in a weird little box. Hey, Bo. Hey, Bo. What do you think? Does this all sound like a bunch of crap to you? Yeah, that is the face of a guy who's like, yeah, it's a bunch of crap.
Do we see this prophecy being fulfilled in our day? Not with the literal animals, but we do see a spiritual fulfillment. It says the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah. Now, does the knowledge of Jehovah change the behavior of animals? No. But the knowledge of God does change people. In our day, the knowledge of Jehovah helps people who are violent to transform their personality and become peaceable. In harmony with Colossians chapter 3, verse 10, these ones have clothed themselves with a new personality. They've stripped off animalistic, violent tendencies and transformed their lives in harmony with what the Bible teaches. They get along peaceably with others. Perhaps you know someone who made such changes. Or perhaps you made these changes, leaving behind a violent way of life.
Jehovah's Witnesses so consistently paint anybody who's not a witness as being secretly violent. Almost every experience that they put out these days from somebody who came from the world and converted to be a witness is somebody who used to be very violent or temperamental.
A man named Jose was trained in the martial arts and in the use of weapons. He'd broken the law so many times that he was brought to trial on 22 counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison.
I'm 53 years old. I was known as a troublemaker. I was fighting in the bars, come to a point where you begin to enjoy it.
I had no love for people. I was a violent person, always on the edge of anger. I used drugs, and I belonged to a gang.
And this is a not-so-subtle scare tactic. The world is scary. The world outside of the group is full of violent people who will try to kill you, not just physically, but spiritually. But don't worry, Jehovah told the Israelites that the lion and the lamb would reside in harmony, and reside in harmony too. They would resign in harmony, they would both quit their jobs in harmony, and they would reside in harmony. And that meant, when he said that to the Israelites, that there's a religious group that's nice.
Imagine the peace that will reign in God's new world. Where we can wander this beautiful globe.
Explore every corner.
Okay, but this is all footage that they captured now, right? Like in the real world that we live in, year of our Lord 2022, these aren't hypothetical drawings of what the world will be like. These are pictures and videos of the Earth now. Actually, mostly it's probably stock footage that was filmed by somebody else that then Watchtower paid money to put it in their video. And it's really nice that the world provides this service to Jehovah's organization, that a worldly profiteering group who only makes these videos for money, sells them to the right organization. I wonder if the people who make stock images and videos will be spared at Armageddon for their sacrifice.
How would you feel during a long journey where you might meet wild animals and criminals along the road? Jehovah assured the returning exiles that they would return in safety and dwell in peace. In the spiritual paradise we enjoy right now, people who were once violent have learned to be humble, loving, and peaceable.
Oh boy. So apparently, what this scripture meant, in a very real and valid way, is that in the year 2022, a religion would help people to be less violent and animalistic in their attitudes. And that's what God meant by saying that he would literally make lions eat straw and not attack the Israelites. That's what we're saying here. A little flimsy. This is one of those things that would definitely have bothered me a little bit as a witness, like, it's a bit of a stretch, but I probably would have brushed it off because it is the kind of thing that you're hearing constantly as a witness. But in hindsight, the reach that he's making here is pretty wild. Look at the Bible verse that he's referencing and see if that in any way conjures the image of a religious organization in the 21st century helping some people to become less like lions in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. But then also, literally, lions will be nice to humans in the future. So Jehovah said this. He just said, lions will eat straw. There's no more bad animals. It'll be amazing. And then when they got to the promised land, Jehovah was like, that was actually not serious yet. It will be in the future. But hey, Yahweh, Jehovah, Jahweh? Do we like Jahweh?
Don't mind Jahweh. Jahweh is nice. You can call me Jahweh.
Everything is great. The not being dead part, for me specifically, is really good. It did sort of promise that there would be, like, peace with the animals, and we're not really experiencing that. I went up to a lion recently, which we have in the part of the world where we are in Bible times, and dang near about took my hand off when I tried to pet that thing.
That part, yeah. So that is not something that will literally happen in your lifetime.
Wait, so you, like... It was like a trick?
No, it's real. What I meant for you is that now, because of the Holy Spirit, which is the thing I haven't really talked about yet, but that is going to help you to become less animalistic. Not you necessarily, but like any new people who come into the tribe of Israel, they'll have an easier time being less animalistic.
Really? That's what you meant? What did the straw mean? I don't really get that part.
Actually, yeah, and I should mention, because this is a tribal society, most of it is not going to apply to you, or like people converting to your religion. Most of it is going to apply to a future group that'll be like the modern day you.
We are the modern day us.
No, modern like in the future. Like the year 2022.
2020. We're counting down our years, by the way. We're like counting down to zero. I assume when we hit zero, that then like a bunch of crazy stuff would happen.
No, that's actually, I don't know why you're doing that. We're going to reset. Not at zero, but after zero. There's going to be a guy, this guy is great. He's one of the best guys. My generals say that he's the best guy out of all the guys. But he really sort of, when you think about it, this guy, and I say this all the time, and I hear this, is this guy, he's going to die. And his death is going to be so spectacular that it's going to completely reset all of human time. All of human time will be completely rewritten. Okay, I don't know what happened to your voice. Nothing happened to my voice. It's the same voice I've always had. It's normal and good. It's the best voice. It seems like you were having trouble doing the other voice. I do this. I can do this at any time.
But then I think you realize that when you try to be more naturalistic and talk in that voice, it's actually kind of difficult.
You're talking down to literally God right now.
See, now you're just doing your normal voice, but then you switch into a thing that I don't understand at all. It sounded like it was an impression of somebody that doesn't exist yet.
There's a cute cat. Hey, cat. I invented cats. Hey, Bo.
I do like cats. But lions are a kind of cat.
No. This conversation's over.
Something else we can do as we await the future fulfillment of the wolf and the lamb feeding together is to meditate on what it will be like to help resurrected ones who were violent to become peaceable. Imagine studying with a resurrected one who had a violent background, perhaps experiencing a violent death because of a fierce personality. How will you reason with the person from God's Word to help him see the need to be a peacemaker? What examples of such transformations will you share? And how will you explain the prophecies of peace at Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9, and chapter 65, verse 25?
So if you're a non-witness watching this, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that after Armageddon, the earth will be restored to a paradise. Not magically, but through the labor of the surviving Jehovah's Witness remnant that survived Armageddon. And after that happens, or as that's happening, people will start to be resurrected from the dead, righteous and unrighteous. So somebody with a violent past might be resurrected from the dead. And there is going to be a teaching work that takes place where witnesses set up a paradise school and teach everybody about what Earth was like when they were alive, and about the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and everything. They'll just have to learn everything. So what he's talking about is a scenario where a Jehovah's Witness who has survived Armageddon is preaching to a resurrected person who, in our world now, was violent. Now, a violent murdering criminal might be resurrected to Paradise Earth, but somebody like me, I will not be. People who wickedly reject Jehovah's organization have no chance at a resurrection. And I said that kind of glibly, but think about what that means for abuse survivors within the organization. People who have undergone abuse from within the organization and leave because of that, they have no chance at being resurrected because they've rejected Jehovah's organization. But the abuser actually does have a chance of being resurrected. So the abuse victim standing up for their rights and speaking out about an organization that has systemic failures, that person has no shot of resurrection. The abuser actually does have a shot. So that's just a super cool thing that witnesses believe.
Jehovah is the great healer. Only he can make the promise. No resident will say, I am sick. Why can we be confident that Jehovah is going to keep his promise to bring an end to all sickness? We find assurance in the words of Isaiah chapter 35, verses 5 and 6. Please open your Bibles to that scripture. Here we read a promise of healing that Jehovah made to the nation of Israel. This promise gives us hope because it was actually fulfilled on a small scale more than 2,500 years ago.
I hope your pin cushion's ready, so take that pin out. This is the big cognitive dissonance extravaganza that Watchtower has kind of been preparing for and leading up to throughout this symposium. They need it to be the case that every one of these promises made perfect sense to the Israelites, made perfect sense now, make perfect sense for a future fulfillment. Because, you see, we now have faith in Jehovah's promises because they were fulfilled in the past. So if there was a promise in the past that wasn't fulfilled, that would be a problem. So there has to be a solution to everything, right? For this whole thing to hold together. But they noticed, it would seem, that Jehovah said that they would be healed, the Israelites. That the deaf would hear again, that the blind would see again. And yet, that did not happen to any of the Israelites, and we still have blindness, but you see, it was fulfilled in a minor way. And the way we know this is because there's a principle that we all know and didn't just make up for this convention right now for this talk in order for our entire theology to make sense. And it's that Jehovah restores what was lost.
But you may ask, were the blind, deaf, lame, and speechless really healed at that time? To answer, we need to apply a basic principle. Jehovah restores what was lost. During the 70 years of exile, Jehovah did not punish the Israelites by striking them with physical blindness, deafness, lameness, and loss of speech. Therefore, their restoration would not require the healing of their physical disabilities.
And this makes total sense. I was so worked up about this that I had to talk about it on its own as a live stream. If you've already seen me talk about this, you can skip ahead to the time marker on the screen. I will play a few highlights of that now so you can get the full picture of why this completely breaks Jehovah's Witness theology. There's our guy.
No resident will say, I am sick.
No resident will say, I am sick. So this is the point of the talk. They are going back to that verse that every Jehovah's Witness knows by heart. No resident will say, I am sick. And when you think about it, this is a pretty important verse for Jehovah's Witnesses. Basically, the phrase paradise earth does not appear in the Bible. If you search the phrase paradise earth, you will get only a few results from the study notes that Jehovah's Witnesses have added in their specific version of the Bible, the New World Translation. And so what do they do? How do they support this, central tenet of their belief system, which is that we will all shortly inherit a paradise earth after Armageddon? Well, mostly what they do is they point to like 1 or 2 verses in the New Testament where it talks about God's kingdom on earth. But in the Old Testament, they go to these verses in the restoration prophecies given in the book of Isaiah. This is a great question from Mecca, but there were still blind Jews, right? And yeah, this is a good question because 70 years is how long Watchtower says this exile took place. So entire generations, if you go by the dictionary definition of the word generations, passed. Most of the people who would be returning to Jerusalem would have been people who were born in Babylon, because 70 years had passed. So there were people who were little babies when all this started, who were 70 when this ended, who the natural aging process would have happened. They would be blind or losing their sight. They would be losing their hearing, all sorts of natural physical ailments. But what James Mance is saying is that Jehovah didn't specifically take away, he didn't curse them with these things. It wasn't Jehovah who made them blind and deaf, etc. Therefore, it's not his obligation to restore those things. Does anybody else sense a bit of a plot hole here? Why exactly were they the ones, why were they getting sick to begin with? Why do people get sick, lose their hearing and sight, and die? Inherited sin, right? That's the thing that we all agree on. That's God's get out of jail free card, right? That's the whole reason why suffering exists, is because it was Satan's fault. He tricked Adam and Eve into sinning, and therefore sin was inherited by everyone, including the Jews, including us today. So what has changed exactly? Why was Jehovah not able to restore their vision and hearing and all this stuff? And how can he say that and also say that Jehovah did keep his promise and did restore these things for the Jews? Well, let's see this.
Afflictions are a good description of the self-inflicted spiritual sickness that had caused the nation to fall into apostasy and lose Jehovah's favor. Jehovah saw their repentant attitude and their desire to restore true worship in Jerusalem. He healed their spiritual sickness by forgiving their sins and restoring them to his favor.
So apparently, evidently what Jehovah meant is, well, I didn't mean like literally. I didn't mean like I would literally take away your blindness. I meant like you were spiritually blind. And thus, by restoring your favor, you're not spiritually blind anymore. This is insane, and this sent me into a spiral, and I was inconsolable for days, and I was curled up in a ball on the couch, weeping and screaming at James Mance after I finally remembered his name. So there's no language saying that this is spiritual sickness, and in fact, the entire basis of this talk is that this only applied to spiritual sickness. Spiritual blindness, that thing we all know about. If we search for spiritual sickness in the Bible, we'll put this in quotes, we look at Bibles, we get one result. We get exactly one result from 1 Corinthians study note. So this actually has 0 results in the Bible. Never is anything referred to as spiritual sickness. There's no such thing as spiritual blindness. There's no such thing as spiritual hunger. This entire concept that things could be fulfilled spiritually, but not literally, is not in the Bible. I think that's important, that the terms they are using and taken as a given fact and as a logical conclusion to the things they are presenting are literally not in the Bible. The language is not found there. So, Bible says, eyes of the blind will be opened, the deaf will hear again, the mute will talk again. We know that this will come true because God's promises always come true. How do we know that God's promises always come true? Because he fulfilled prophecies before in Bible times, like with the Israelites. He said that they would be restored to Israel, and they were. Here's the thing. He promised the Israelites that he would open their eyes and heal their deafness and physical ailments, but he didn't. So that, you see, was figurative. He meant it spiritually. We know that his promises always come true because they did come true, except for the times when they only partially came true because he just meant it figuratively. There is nothing in the verse to indicate that that was supposed to be metaphorical or spiritual. And in fact, the notion of spiritual blankety blank is not in the Bible. So that's what we have. And this is why I say that this line of thinking destroys the entire Jehovah's Witness theology. You probably get why.
Did you notice that the end of sickness is related to our being pardoned for our errors or sins? Clearly, that ties the fulfillment to a spiritual healing.
Okay. He didn't have any obligation to heal the Israelites because he didn't cause their suffering. But how do we know that Jehovah is going to heal our physical suffering? Well, we use the same verse that the Israelites had and say, yeah, but like for real this time, it will actually happen. You know, not now, but again in the future. So the Israelites thought it would happen, didn't. They died not knowing any of this because they didn't have the faith in this great slave. And then now, you might think it applies in our time, still doesn't, but it's still a little bit happening, but it's going to happen. We know that because our physical ailments are tied to our spiritual ailments. But the only reason why they were spiritually sick in Israel is because of inherited sin that we still have in our day. This doesn't make sense, guys. This doesn't make any sense. Am I crazy, or does this lay bare the absolute nonsense hypocrisy of their doctrine? Like, am I reaching? I feel like this just on its face is just so contradictory. And thank you, John Paul. See, what a slippery road. Real versus spiritual can now apply to anything. Yes, exactly. Anything that seems like it's not happening or didn't happen, nope, it did. From the perspective of an Israelite, this is exactly what they were doing. They were saying, look, things are terrible now, but look, any day now, Jehovah will fulfill his promises. Look at this promise he made us. He's going to cure all our ailments. We're going to be living in an earthly paradise. It's going to be amazing. We just have to meditate on these promises and it will come true. And then, from the perspective of the Israelites, Jehovah says, okay, you did it. You're free from exile. Go back home. The Israelites are like, oh, amazing. So you're going to cure my blindness? Well, I mean, not yet. Not in your lifetime. I mean, I will, but it'll be like spiritual. You know how like you're spiritually weak? And the Israelites are like, well, no, because the entire reason why you restored us to favor is because we regained your favor, right? Like we lost your favor, now we regained your favor, so we are doing spiritually the right thing. Like kind of how, you know, you led people out of the spiritual, or how you will let people out of spiritual Babylon the Great in 1919, like how that's going to happen. It was like, oh yeah, that'll be another fake secondary mini spiritual fulfillment of a prophecy. They're using the logic that the author of this prophetic book of the Bible also used, but they're saying, yeah, even though Jehovah kind of pulled a tricky God is a tricky boy trick on everybody, no, next time it'll work for sure.
Okay, there's no easy way to make this transition. I recorded the rest of that before I moved, and recently we did move, and I shaved my face, so this is just totally weird, bad continuity. Sorry, blah, blah, blah. Gary Losch's last talk is a pretty big nothing burger, to be honest. He pretty much wraps up everything we've heard while also introducing the resurrection as a thing that happened spiritually to the Israelites. They were spiritually resurrected. It was as if they came back from the dead, and it's just a bunch of nonsense.
Because he already brought his people back to life figuratively in the past.
He introduces 1919 as a thing.
In 1919, Jehovah did something similar. He released his modern-day people from spiritual captivity.
In 1919, the chronology goes beyond what we're covering in this video. I'm not going to get into all that, and he doesn't bother laying the groundwork for why witnesses believe in 1919. He just kind of says it, as a thing and then moves on. But he does say something that I think is worth talking about and breaking down.
The threat of death is a powerful weapon. Those under Satan's control use it to force people to betray their friends or to give up their convictions. But that threat is powerless against us.
I had to re-listen to this part a few times because I was a little bit confused as to what he meant by this. He presents the fear of death as something that's weaponized by worldly people, but not Jehovah's Witnesses, because of course they don't fear death. Witnesses, after all, have no problem martyring themselves. They'll die refusing a blood transfusion. Life-saving medical treatment? No, not for me. I don't need that. Jehovah doesn't want me to, and I'll be just fine preserved in Jehovah's memory for when I'm resurrected. Dying in prison, being tortured and beaten for Jehovah's Witnesses, that is also fine. But Jehovah's Witnesses weaponize death just as much as any religion, if not more so. The only reason why the disfellowshipping arrangement works is because family members will fear that they themselves will die if they don't shun their kids, their parents, their close family, whoever it is that they are shunning. So for my parents who shun me, if they don't shun me, if they don't abide by the disfellowshipping arrangement, they are getting in the way of Jehovah's discipline, and they themselves might be blood guilty by interfering with that. It is the fear of not being good enough, of your best not being good enough, that motivates Jehovah's Witnesses. If your best isn't good enough, then you won't survive Armageddon. You're kind of only as good as your last meeting. Witnesses like to say that Jehovah's memory is not so short as to forget the things you have done for him. Unless, you end up having conscientious objections with the leadership and you leave based on those reasons, then, you're kind of only as good as your last good deed. And probably that wasn't good enough, because the worst possible thing you can do is speak out against the organization. The fear of eternal destruction is the thing that motivates Jehovah's Witnesses. It is the cudgel that the leadership uses to force its members into submission. All of these beautiful promises we've seen that, definitely came true partially sort of in the past and are kind of true now and definitely will be true in the future. Well, you only get to see those amazing things if you survive. If you don't get killed by God. Make no mistake, this is all about fear. This is all about the fear of death and how your guaranteed future, all these amazing promises that they've been talking about the entire time, can be ripped away from you in an instant. And if that strikes you as cold and unloving and almost human and petty, maybe it's because it's actually humans making the rules and not God, invisibly through two layers of human channels. And Jesus, too. Jesus is kind of the forwarding message service. You call Jesus, like, okay, in Jesus' name I pray, and then Jesus knows to forward on your prayer to God, and then God's like, okay, and so then he filters all the blessings back down through Jesus, then through the governing body, then through the branch, then through the elders, and back to you. So there's a lot of, filters in place before you get that loving Holy Spirit, Anyway, this was a bit of a drag. It took me a while to get through this, as you can tell by the gap between uploads, and frankly, a lot been going on in the personal life. We'll get into it in a future stream or something, but thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons, and please stick around after the credits, because I usually like to put in something kind of fun, so please support the channel if you can. I really want to be able to do this kind of thing full time because I find it really fun and fulfilling. So if you want to make that happen, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about the channel.
Is this booming enough for God? Bo's interested in this voice, that's for sure.
Okay, with the violence thing, you are constantly making us go to war and fight people and kill people, and we're just adult people.
You gotta do that. The holy war. You gotta cleanse the earth of all the people I don't like.
Yeah, you're the one making us do all that violent stuff.
I'm not making you do anything. You have free will. If you don't do it, I'll kill you. Now I sound like Obama.
I don't know who that is. That the deaf would see again. That the blind would... always felt kind of racist to me that Watchtower just doesn't like martial arts. Blanket statement. Seems weird. Seems foreign. Don't do it anymore, please.
He doesn't make us come. We must willfully come.